love that music, so jazzy. Okay, hey everybody, nice to meet you. I just want to start by acknowledging the pandemic was terrible. It sucked. This presentation, however, is not per se about the pandemic. So I don't want to dwell in the pandemic zone, but it would be impossible for us to talk about technology in education in any context without acknowledging what we've just been through, the resilience that we displayed, potentially the broad impact that the pandemic has and will continue to have on the future of technology and education. But broadly speaking, across the kind of arc of history, more or less, the way that we teach has stayed relatively stable for the bulk of human history. From the beginning of teaching, it's somebody standing up in front of a group of other people, sharing some knowledge, having some kind of interaction, perhaps doing something interactive. And it's interesting because when I was reflecting on this, I realized that the education sector has been a catalyst and consumer of technology from the very beginning of history. We have technologies like writing because they were in service of teaching. And all throughout history, as new technologies have kind of evolved and developed, education has often been at the forefront of bringing those into the mix. But overall, taking a long view, taking a big view, things are relatively the same as they were before. Okay, so are you ready to feel old this morning? I did not promise you anything but a roller coaster of emotions, and I want to make sure that we're all on it together, okay? So buckle up. Today will not be as normal. On the left-hand side, a video clip of a very young and handsome Matthew Broderick in one of my favorite movies, War Games. Some of you might remember. Now, I promise that you might feel a little bit old today. War Games turns 40 next year. It's the 40th anniversary of the incredibly important movie War Games. And then on the right, a new technology, a new product from Meta called Make a Video. Are you guys familiar with DALL-E, the AI technology that allows you to type in some text and it creates a picture? Some might call art. I'm going to put it in quotes. Okay? So this tech from Meta that's running on the right-hand side, you type in some text and it makes a video out of the text. These are AI-generated video sequences from pure AI. Okay? So over the course of the last 40 years, we've had a tremendous evolution in some of the interactive technologies that people can experience. And what I think is really super funny is that while we've got this, new make a video tech where you can type in any text and a video is automatically generated for you, many of us still interact with computer systems that have that same interface that War Games used to have. There's still a lot of text, blue text on a black background, green text on a black background computing. But if you felt like technology has been advancing dramatically and that the pace of that advance has been increasing exponentially, you are in fact correct. Your vibes are correctly indicating the world. This is a chart. This is called Moore's Law. Many of you are familiar with this idea, but the original concept of Moore's Law posited that every 18 months or so, the number of transistors that could be placed on an integrated computer chip would double. Okay? That was the original idea of Moore's Law. Now, broadly speaking, Moore's Law represents the amount of computing power available per dollar over a period of time. This is a logarithmic chart. So if shown in natural form, this would have an extremely sharp exponential line, and you can see the inflection point approximately 40 or 50 years ago. This is a representation of computing power per dollar over the last 122 years. Now, what's interesting about this particular, there are several interesting things about the impact of technology over time in Moore's Law. The first one is, of course, what is the implication of having cheaper technology? Why do we care that we get more computing power per dollar? What is the relevance of that? Well, other than the accessibility feature, right, making technology more accessible to more people, it also, in theory, unlocks the potential for a wider range of possible applications that have lower economic benefit, meaning it's cheaper to experiment, it's cheaper to fail when technology is cheaper to implement, right? So the theory goes, cheaper tech, more experimentation, more entrepreneurship, more failure, more results and outcomes. In Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, amid extensive claptrap, and I'm not going to recommend that anybody read the book from cover to cover, but it is nonetheless interesting, Thiel does make one observation that really stood out to me, which is that if you were a child of the 50s, 60s, or 70s, you're probably disappointed today at the overall state of technology. Because what you were promised then was a world in which we would have cyborgs that were human-like, where we would fly into space, we would all have cars, we'd have unlimited cheap energy, right? What happened to all of that? Thiel makes the observation, he's like, okay, well, we've got social media, always on social media, but we didn't end up with any of those other things that were promised. And so what's crazy about the arc of technological advance over the last 50 years is that the pace didn't slow, the pace increased beyond what anybody in the 50s or 60s thought would happen. It just didn't get directed in the direction that we expected it to, which means that in the directions in which it was focused, it's even more extreme. Because we didn't get the flying cars, we didn't get the unlimited energy, we didn't get the space exploration, by and large. What we did get was incredible computing power in everyone's pocket. We did get social media and whatever that is worth for us in the world. And at the same time, tremendous investments in artificial intelligence and other kinds of hidden or secret technologies that are happening in parallel. So what all of this means is that the tech that we both see and we don't see is evolving rapidly, and that makes it more and more difficult for any one of us, no matter how well educated we are, no matter how open-minded we are, no matter how sensitive to technology and open to technology we are, it makes it more and more and more and more and more and more difficult to stay on top of what's going on. How do we possibly, in this environment, this is my lifetime, right here. I know you thought I was younger, but it's true. This is my lifetime right here from the inflection point onward. How do you possibly stay on top of this? Okay, are you ready to feel young? Let me play a clip for you. Sometimes like comedians are best able to distill down certain complicated subjects and get at the heart of something that I think is very, very important. And so I just want to share a short clip, just a couple of minutes, that I think encapsulates one of the things I really want to talk to you about today from the brilliant, creative Amy Schumer. Okay. Luckily my mom is not in the room because we've literally had this version of this conversation. Okay, so the reality is, none of us in this room can afford to have the kind of obsolete attitude towards technology that Amy Schumer's Not Real Mom represented in that video. We just simply cannot do that. We can't do what our parents or our grandparents ended up doing with technology for several reasons. The first one is we are going to live too long. In our lifetimes, technology will continue to evolve substantially, and we can't be left behind in that way anymore. And the second reason is each one of us in this room is a leader of people. We are educating, we are driving people forward. We cannot afford to be obsolete and to have our understanding of technology be obsolete. And so my first, the most important kind of advocacy position when thinking about the application of technology in education is to build resilience in ourselves, to build the capacity and the resilience in ourselves and in our institutions to not only accept but thrive in an environment where technology evolves at the pace that Moore's Law predicts that it will evolve in. We must be resilient. So let's put that in context using a topic of great conflict, a topic with tremendously divergent opinions. Let's use NFTs as an example, okay? NFTs, non-fungible tokens, you all know this, blockchain type technology, typically used in reference to something like art that's represented on the blockchain. That's the most classic example of NFTs. So when I put this up on the screen, what were you thinking? You're like, NFT guy, right? I lost a lot of money on NFTs. NFTs suck. NFTs are so stupid. Okay. Typically, there's three questions that we always ask about a new technology when a technology comes out. Let's ask them about NFTs. Why do we need them? How do they work? And what do we do with them? These are the three basic questions for any new technology. Let's start with how they work. Many of us believe that we can't correctly adapt to, use, and leverage a new technology unless we understand at its core how that technology works. Well, one of the greatest advances of the last 10 or 20 years is the low-code, no-code revolution, which makes it possible for us to use new technologies to instrument technology without having to understand exactly how the technology works. And as I want to encourage as much creativity and understanding as possible, but it's not going to be possible, even for highly technically literate people, to understand how every new technology functions. If that's a necessary gate, if we can't adapt and use new technology without fully understanding exactly how it works, we are going to be left behind. We will not be able to understand how everything works. And it's important to understand it, but it's not a gating factor. Now, the why question is the one where I think many people, and most people, perhaps you, get really hung up. Why do we need them? What purpose do they serve? Well, when we ask the question, why do we need a new technology, we're really asking one of two different questions on its face. And one of them is, why should I invest my limited resources and energy in understanding or using this technology, right? That's question number one. And question number two is, why should I invest my capital, right, that is investable capital, however you want to define that, into this new technology? I don't think we should ask this question about new technologies as a gating factor for whether or not we engage with them. I think that question is rooted in a kind of cynicism that reflects our modern era in a way that's actually counterproductive. What if we just set aside the why question for a minute? Let's just set it aside. Let us pretend that we are like ancient humans and a new technology has suddenly been bestowed upon us by science, by the creator, by whoever. A new technology suddenly appears. What do ancient humans do after they process through how they got this new technology and create myths about it? What do they do with that technology? Well, they see what they can do with it. What do we do with this fire that has magically appeared? And that's where we must begin our process. And so I will just show you one example of NFTs. This is Bo Brandon is an associate professor at Pepperdine. He teaches a very popular Introduction to Personal Finance course at Pepperdine. And last year, as part of his course, he decided to mint an NFT for his students. And that's the NFT that you see there, the Cavs and Cubs NFT, the static NFT. He minted that NFT. This is unique to the 2021 semester of personal finance with Professor Brandon. You earn that by completing the course in his class. The one on the other side, the one that's moving, he invited the students to create an NFT in the class themselves that they collaboratively created. And that NFT contains their rating and review of the professor is embedded inside of that NFT. So you rate the professor inside this smart contract NFT that they created, that they shared with the professor. So these two NFTs represent Brandon's class. Now, I know what you're thinking. Do we need this? Does anybody need this? No, we do not. Okay? And even if we pass past the point, do we need this? Do we need this to be on the blockchain? Could we not have just hired somebody to design a graphic and handed it out to people or given them a badge or whatever? Sure, yes. We don't need the blockchain for this. We don't need this. None of these things are necessary. Vast majority of things that we do all day aren't necessary. I don't mean to make this sound banal, but this is an example, this is a perfect example of using NFT technology in a way that connects educator to student, that connects the education to a moment in time, and that creates an opportunity for experimentation and learning. Even if we view it as banal, even if we view it as kind of like, a small element, a tiny little moment, maybe it's an advance, maybe it isn't, it's an opportunity to collaborate, co-create, and express using a new technological platform. And we do not know what the net results of this will be. We do not know what our students who participated in creating this smart contract NFT will do with the knowledge and understanding that they gained from this process. We do not know that. That is creating something and putting that forward. It's important for all of us, especially those of us who are technological educators, to not get caught in the guru trap. And I put myself up there, a chubbier version of myself up there, on the slide in a very self-effacing way. I have made so many predictive mistakes in my professional career as an expert in technology. My favorite one is that many, many years ago, a professor, a Stanford professor, approached me. I had a game startup at the time, and asked me to invest in this like startup that needed to raise a little bit more money. And I asked him why we needed a better search engine, because Yahoo was pretty good, and that was my I didn't invest in Google pre-IPO moment, right? But I only say this, it helps me. Thank you for being part of my therapy around this this missed investment. But I only say this for you for this. It's really easy to be cynical about new technologies when they emerge. It's really easy to be cynical. It's really easy, especially if you're an expert and you use tech all day, every day, or you're teaching people technology. It's really easy to sit there and say, this isn't going to do anything. This isn't worth it. This isn't worth the investment. I don't think this is the right frame for us to be successful or for our students to be successful. The right frame is for us to be filled with gratitude that the technology exists. Approach it from a perspective of grace and figure out a way to at least experiment with it, to integrate it, to understand it. And I know there's a lot of demands, right? There's a lot of different things going on, and we'll talk about those. So I used NFTs as an example. Let's use something a little bit less controversial. How about slides? How about PowerPoint as a case in point, okay? There's a lot more pieces on NFTs, but there's plenty of think pieces talking about how PowerPoint ruined the world. Just try Googling it. PowerPoint ruined the universe. You will see plenty of people be like, PowerPoint is terrible. Steve Jobs banned PowerPoint, blah, blah, blah. And you won't get any argument from me. I hate PowerPoint, okay? I made this in Keynote. I'm not a fan of PowerPoint. We're playing it in PowerPoint, but I don't like PowerPoint. But what would you say to somebody who told you, and perhaps you're in this room, what would you say to somebody who told you, I don't want to teach with visual aids? I will not use a visual aid. That ruins my lesson plan by demonstrating something. You might say, oh, okay, it's a little bit of tilting at windmills here. There's a little bit of Cervantes in your current lifestyle, right? The idea that we need to teach with some amount of visualization, there's an accessibility reason we care about that, right? There's visual learners and we want to support them, and so we teach with visual aids for them. But broadly speaking, it's become very normal that we teach with visual aids, right? The meta question that we need to be asking, ooh, look at that transition, that origami transition, and that is the question we need to ask, right, is, sure, we can do anything we want with these visual aids, but do we need to do everything that we want with these visual aids? And the answer is, of course, no, we do not. Just because we can do it, just because we can do that crazy slide transition doesn't mean that it adds any value. And I have a forthcoming book on presentation techniques for a distracted world called the AHA Method. My next book is coming out beginning of next year, talking about how to present and communicate in this social media addled universe. We'll talk some about it. And the point that I always make is you've got to have these visual tools, but you don't necessarily need to use every single tool in the toolkit. But using the tools is, of course, valuable. So how do we put a lens on technology to understand how, when, why, what we might use it in instruction, and how to think about what is here and what is coming next and what we can apply? Okay, so there's a couple of lenses that we use in the technology industry to do that. And the first one is what's called the tech adoption curve, or some people know it as the crossing the chasm, as you can see here, the chasm. The crossing the chasm challenge, okay? So when new technologies come into the market, they're initially adopted by, or what we call early adopters or innovators, right? Then there's a period of time that they languish, they don't move forward, and then all of a sudden, boom, that tech is now in the hands of a broader and broader and broader population, until eventually it's also in the hands of the skeptics, who are the laggards, the last people to hand it out. Okay, so think about slides for a second. Where are we now on the use of visual aids in teaching? We're all the way over here now, pretty much. Even pretty skeptical people are using slides. We dial back 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, we would see that kind of midpoint on using PowerPoint or visual aids sort of slide back along that time horizon, right? So this is one frame. Where are we in the tech adoption curve for understanding? And where do you want to be? We can't all be, pure innovators or early adopters all the time about everything. But where are we? Another lens, and this is the Schadenfreude-based lens, for those of you who enjoy a little salt with your tech prognostication. This is what's called the Gartner hype cycle, if you guys have not seen this. Gartner publishes this every year, and it's basically a chart of who's hating on what in tech, okay? So the idea is that at the beginning of a new technology, everything gets really hyped up, right? There's some kind of innovation, this innovation is triggered, and then boom, all of this investment and energy goes into this in tech, right? Everybody's like, innovation, innovation. And it comes up to a peak, and then it's got nowhere to go but down, right? The tech reaches the peak of inflated expectation, and then it enters the trough of disillusionment, which is the period after that hype peak where people start being like, see, I told you this tech was nonsense. This tech is garbage, right? And then slowly over time, it maybe climbs a slope of enlightenment where people start to realize how they can use that technology and what they can do with it. And it eventually ends up in what they call the plateau of productivity, where it's just a fact of life. It's just a part of everyday life. It's now embedded into the world in which we live. Okay? So of course, for this year, you can see where NFTs are. It's this second one. It's just falling into that trough of disillusionment, like at 100 miles an hour. Okay? So, so you can look at the Gartner chart, but we can also use this as a frame of reference or a lens to think about the tech that we use. And this is not, I'm not calling anybody out. FIU is a very innovative institution, so this is not intended as a direct challenge to this particular institution, but broadly speaking, in my experience, education tends to suffer from being a little late to the game at even looking at new technologies, at even turning its attention to the adoption of new technologies, often only noticing them when they are at or beyond the peak of their hype cycle. So we first, in education, start thinking about investing when the valley is already saying, you might want to wait a minute. We've already spent all of our money on this. We've spent a lot of time or energy. This thing's about to crater. That's when ed tends to show up and go, well, let's see what we can do with it, right? And as a result, there's a lot of disappointing cycles with the adoption of technology and learning. Because a lot of times these technologies are being adopted a little bit late. They're being seen, evaluated, tested, implemented, and tracked in their kind of shadow period. And it takes a lot of fortitude to get from that into the place of productivity, into enlightenment and productivity, which is where ultimately we need valuable technology stand up. And so part of the thing that we need to do is shift ourselves a little bit earlier. So events like EdIT are designed to help us shift our frame and move the conversation a little bit earlier in the cycle. And once we understand where that technology is in the cycle, and once you're in alignment with the way that the technology industry approaches it, you can also then put that frame on it. It's okay, we're in experimental phase. This is our test phase. And we know that things are going to go up and they're going to go down. But we need to invest in them now at this point. While all that is happening in tech and through that tech prism, I'm not going to tell you, anything that you don't know, but obviously there's been a major shift in terms of what institutions and funders expect from educators. And that shift is really seismic. This move from teaching as an objective to learning as an objective, I think to outsiders feels like a very small shift, but actually is a monumental change in the way that we think about what the results are of our work as educators. And of course, this shift would not be possible without all kinds of mediating and important technologies. But it does present a kind of important frame of reference. And at the same time, the institutions are rightfully demanding that we create content and learning that is more accessible, that is more equitable, and that is more inclusive. And of course, technology plays a role in all of those things. So our pressure, the institutional, the funder focus, that kind of lens is pushing us to hopefully a more accessible, equitable, and inclusive future in which we focus on learning outcomes rather than teaching outcomes. But what does the customer, what does the student want? What are they thinking about day in and day out as they're contemplating their educational pathway? I like to think of it, I call it the 4 E's. They are looking for empathy, they're looking for engagement, they're looking for entertainment, and they're looking for effectiveness from this process. They describe this many different ways, but these are the kind of user behavioral 4 E's that I think about a lot. And why? Where do those 4 E's come from? Why is this customer, why is this student so focused on these things? My argument, the argument that I will make, is that is a fundamental change in the persona, in the expectations, in the behaviors of today's young people today, largely driven by the influence and impact of games on their life, on society, and the way that their brains work. Games fundamentally change the way that people think about the world and see themselves in it. All media has done that, right? I don't mean to overstate games' influence relative to film or television or music or books or whatever forms of media we may have. But it's also impossible for me as a student of behavioral science and somebody who's worked on a lot of game-like experiences to ignore the fact that games are kind of different from those other media and have had a much larger impact. And the reason for that is dopamine. Games are designed very differently from other forms of entertainment in that they're structured as little challenge and reward loops, okay? So you start playing a game, and the game challenges you to something. Hey, jump this item, catch this item, blow this item up, figure out this situation, unlock this puzzle, right? You do that thing, you complete that little challenge, and you get a little jolt of dopamine. It's like, I did it, right? Feels really good. And so the next thing that happens when you go through that challenge achievement loop is that you want to do it again because it was inherently pleasurable. And so you start down another challenge achievement loop. Challenge achievement, right? Great. Okay, we all do that, right? You do that as educators. We all have that in our experience. It happens to us every single day. But in a game context, in a video game, this dopaminergic loop occurs hundreds of times per hour, not once per semester, hundreds of times per hour. And over the course of a lifetime of being exposed to that, decades and decades and decades of that, over that course of a lifetime, that changes a person's demand and desire for that dopamine release. It is, in a sense, you could argue, a kind of addictive behavior, an addictive triggering behavior that emerges from this gamer brain. And of course, games kind of all-encompassing. In fact, and I know this because this has been a big part of the last 15 years of my professional life, broadly speaking, games are so powerful that the rest of industry wanted to figure out how they could capture that energy of games, that addictiveness of games, that dopamine loop of games, and apply that to things which were much more quotidian, much more banal. And out of that came gamification, which is the movement that I'm most closely associated with. I wrote 3 books about it and ran a conference and published many papers and, in fact, helped many of the world's worst, that was quite a value judgment. Okay, many of the world's most questionable companies leverage these techniques and technologies to create more engagement with people. I have seen the deep underbelly of the beast here, and the reality is that these ideas, these engaging techniques that come from games have, of course, made their way into every aspect of society, into every product or service. Most of what makes social media so compelling was learned from games. Games were the progenitor. TikTok is the student. Okay? Electronic arts is the teacher. TikTok is the student. In this scenario, not the other way around. And so we have this environment in which there is a lot of effort and emphasis being placed on getting and keeping people's engagement. And I sometimes describe it as a bit of an arms race. Okay? So you've got on one side games and social media, or games and social media. They're competing against each other to create experiences that are ever more engaging for the minds of today. And everybody else in the economy, everybody else, including us, including our institutions, but also civic participation, financial literacy, family time, personal health and well-being. We all have to compete for a dwindling share of that attention from these people because it's being absorbed, right, by this giant sort of machine. Now, lest you thought that I was going to let the educational industry go unscathed, right? I've been casting many an aspersion here on Facebook, TikTok, and gaming companies. Let me remind you that the first really successful games, the first truly successful mega hit games that touched population, broadly speaking, were in fact educational games. Like Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego and The Oregon Trail, both of which are great, right? I see so much enthusiasm for both of these games. I was going to put up a "you died of dysentery" graphic instead, but but I thought we'd start in Reykjavik today. The point is, education was also, like it was a customer for other forms of expression, the education industry was a big customer, a big trigger, a big catalyst for the advent of gaming and its introduction into society, but it sort of stayed in one particular frame or one particular box and kind of stayed in that box until recently, as gamification has sort of evolved. Now, remember the hype cycle that we were talking about before? Where are we at on that with gamification? We were super hyped up, right, in the early 2010s. So in the tech industry, it was early to mid 2010s, so super hyped up. Now things have evolved. Now we see gamification kind of everywhere. It's in its sort of productivity phase at this point. But there's still plenty of opportunity in the educational domain to make use of these particular approaches. In order to do that, however, we will need to be conscious of the fact that games and gamers are not monolithic. When we talk about the gamer brain, when we talk about the student coming in today, the learner coming into us, they are likely exposed to lots of different kind of game-like experiences, but different game-like experiences have different effects on people's brains and create different demands for them. So for example, somebody who's primarily focused on an action game, like an action game player, may be more achievement-oriented. They may be somebody who's more interested in earning the points and getting through the thing and checking off the box and da-da-da-da. Somebody who's more of a strategy game player might be more interested in pushing boundaries. Where does the world end? What is the maximum that I'm able to do here? How can I interact with it? And somebody who's more of a social gamer may be more interested in the interactions that they can generate with others, and that becomes their fuel. And so we as educators have to stop seeing that gamer or that gamer brain or that next generation through one sort of monolithic prism, because they are several different prisms. The criticism that often comes up, and I think I made reference to this before, right, is that this kind of world produces one in which people have a very bad attention span, a very, very short attention span. Now, I put this goldfish up. Some of you may know the reference. Microsoft Research has a very famous thing that's been cited a lot, where they did a bunch of studies on people's attention span, and they found that the average human has about 8 seconds of attention span, which is just slightly below a goldfish's attention span. And this is meant to strike fear into the hearts of rightful thinking people, because attention is destroyed and we cannot possibly do what we need to do and the world cannot possibly advance because people no longer are willing to sit down and pay attention to something that they don't want to pay attention to anymore. Now, I'm not going to argue with you whether or not that is a good thing or a bad thing. But I am going to simply say, perhaps we are measuring the incorrect metric. If the thing that we're asking people to pay attention to is inherently uninteresting to them, if it is not in and of itself engaging, whose fault is that? Who is responsible for ensuring that stuff is engaging to people if we want them to pay attention to it? Perhaps once, and by the way, I think it's a myth, perhaps once we existed in a world in which people were willing to pay attention to something that they didn't really want to pay attention to. Like when you think about your college years, when I talk about my college years, I often talk about look, man, we didn't have computers back then. I had to sit in a lecture hall, and whatever the professor said for 60 minutes, I had to sit down, I just listened to them. I took notes. I was totally focused. I didn't like it, but I did it, right? So of course, that's a lie, right? I've miscast my college years, ignoring the fact that I had a robust note-writing lifestyle, a doodling culture, chatting with my friends, missed a lot of classes. I was a good student. So the point being that we really need a kind of reframing here. And I think one of the great gifts of this short attention span theater for educators, if we choose to see it as a gift, one of the great gifts for us is that it challenges the sacred cow that people should be willing to pay attention to something that is inherently uninteresting. That it creates a challenge for us to make things that are important interesting, and not to conflate importance with interestingness, because they are not the same thing. That we can reconstruct that, I think, is an opportunity for us to use technology. So one of the ways in EdTech, one of the other technologies that of course is going to come up a lot and be a big part of our conversation, is the metaverse. Here's how much Apple hates Facebook. Metaverse autocorrects on Apple platforms. Try it. It doesn't believe this word exists, which I think is hilarious. Little digs, Okay, so the metaverse is obviously one way that we tend to think about EdTech, and I think most lay people, when they think about new technology for education, this is probably the first thing that they think about. It's this virtual classroom environment in which we're represented by avatars and we're going to interact with each other. What does it really mean? What is a metaverse? Now, the metaverse is a funny name, right, for a multiplayer game, effectively. This is pioneered in kind of early multiplayer games. And it has certain characteristics that distinguish it on the surface from other kinds of interactions. It's got representation of a user, so the user must be represented somehow in this experience. It's got customization, so the theory is the user should be able to customize what they look like to other people. So it breaks the connection between what you inherently look like in real life and what you represent yourself as, so how you can represent yourself. And there's a lot of very interesting research from the early days of massively multiplayer online games about gender choices for gamers when there was no photo representation of the gamer. The people used to make very, very interesting choices about how they would represent themselves before there were photos. And that, for many people, feels like a very exciting and very interesting kind of dynamic that we could tap into, so creating more space for people to be themselves. Metaverses have to have some kind of interaction. They can't be single-player games. They've got to have interaction between the people. And they've got to have some set of rules, and that rule set is probably going to be distinct from the rule set that people are accustomed to in the physical world version of this particular metaverse. Okay? So, just for our thought process, where are we at in the hype cycle on metaverses in education? Where are we at in terms of crossing the chasm in terms of metaverses in education? Right? We put those two frames on it. Where are we? Okay, here's the thing. I think we're already there. When we were forced into virtual classrooms, we cobbled together a metaverse educational experience for people without the pretty 3D graphics, without all the bells and whistles, without the full integration. We ended up basically building a metaverse with one where the couple of missing pieces are like, if you don't want people to see what you look like, you just turn your camera off, right? If you don't want people to, if you want to customize what your environment looks like, you put a virtual background on so no one can see your messy room or whatever, right? But the metaverse is upon us, actually, even without the funky bells and whistles. And here again is a lesson of new technology in education, which is that we need not necessarily invest in all the super funky bells and whistles and all the very expensive bells and whistles in order to accomplish the thing, that we sort of set out to accomplish. Okay. So all of this is driving to a particular observation that I have. And if you'll indulge me for a second, I want to bring another frame of reference from the technology industry to you educators, to you who teach. And that is that you are kind of now user experience designers. You are product owners and user experience designers in a way that historically was not a skill set that you needed to have. That is to say, the user experience of your classroom, the user experience of your educational frame could really typically only fall under one of a handful of reference points. Lecture, workshop, seminar, lab. Those were the user experiences. And within those, you could tweak little details. But now, the world is so open, the palette of things that you can play with is so wide open, that I think an increasing challenge in the next sort of cycle is going to be for educators to embrace their role as user experience designers, to really think through in detail what the experience of the user is, in this case the learner, what the experience of the user is from the start to the finish of the class in every detail. In tech UX design, of which I've done plenty, we think in very, very micro terms about every little detail that the user experiences. And you may be thinking, okay, Gabe is throwing around this term UX. I think broadly speaking, I understand what user experience is. Let me distill down what I mean by user experience with a single image. This is what are called desire paths, and I think perfectly illustrate the definition of user experience. Okay? Which is, no matter how good your design is, no matter how much energy, effort, attention you've put into good design, users will find their way from point A to point B with the minimal amount of effort possible to get them where they need to go, no matter what design choices you've made. So when you see this is actually called desire paths, and user experience designers use these as reference points when designing. So when you actually see this, what does this make you think of if you're the designer? If you're the designer of this experience, what do you think you should do here? What was that? Scrap it, right? One option is you just get rid of this weird contraption that is designed to prevent people from running across the street into the road without paying attention, right? Because that's what this gate is for, to prevent you from just biking across the road and running into a car. So one option is scrap it. What's another option? Block the sides. Now we got Americans in the room for sure, right? Well, the user transgressed my design. So what I need to do now is escalate. I'm going to make this wall bigger. But it's a viable choice, right? I can do that. I can extend the walls. Make it easier for everybody. Adjust it. Tweak it. Make it more accessible, right? Yes. Educate the user. God, we have so many options here for this silly little example. None of you are wrong. All of those are good answers. The first thing we need to do, though, is find out why people are walking around the gate. Before we do anything else, we need to answer that question. Why won't they use the gate I put down? Now, here it's obvious. It was obvious to you when you first saw it, right? But we put a gate down. Why won't they use the gate? That's the first question. And then we can explore all the different options for how we get the user into a place where we really want them to be. So, back to our 4 E's. What does the user want? The user wants empathy, they want to be entertained, they want to be engaged, and they want whatever they're learning to be effective. Seems pretty straightforward. Let's talk about each one of these in a little bit of more detail so we can see some examples and some concrete thoughts about how to implement this. And by the way, your answers to the user experience question suggest that you are well on your way to being user experience designers in education, and I'm excited to see what you create. So the first one, as I suggested, was we begin with empathy. So in user experience design, we start with empathy, and that is asking the user questions. What do they need? Why do they need it? What problem can we solve? How do we solve it? What do they think is there? Do we ask enough questions when we think about using instructional technology of our students? Do we approach that from us saying this is the instructional technology we think would be most useful? Or do we approach it from the perspective of saying, what is the instructional technology that they think would be most useful? What do they need from us? Or do we approach it from what do we think they need? And I think there's a balance between the two. We're not trying to make everything like, necessarily super easy, because perhaps we don't learn well in an environment in which everything is super easy. But we also don't need to create artificial barriers that interfere with learning, and tech can often be that kind of barrier. Now, the other aspect of empathy here, which is important, is that specifically in the way we teach and the things we teach, it can often be valuable for our learners to empathize with the characters or other people involved. And technology can provide some context or help for helping teach people how to be empathetic. Not to take people who are unempathetic or sociopathic and make them empathetic, but rather to increase empathy and increase learning around empathy and connection with other people. In an environment in which we've gone to hybrid learning as a sort of semi-permanent or permanent state, in which students are often not going to interact with each other in the physical world and will not get physical cues from each other for long periods of time, the need for teaching empathy grows even more substantially, and technology that helps us teach empathy can be a valuable tool. I'm not going to suggest this as a panacea for a world in which people are unempathetic, but I do want to show you one example. You felt old, perhaps, then you felt young, now you're going to feel something. This is a brief snippet of a trailer for a empathy game called That Dragon Cancer.
Farmer Bill plays building blocks with the cows.
What?
Farmer Bill races the horse and Farmer Bill wins. My shoes were untied.
What does Joel love? Wawa. In cups, bathtubs, and the warm, wet tongues and the cool fur of Das. And maybe the sweet mois of daily affection.
Do you know how they celebrate off-treatment day, like when kids are done with their treatments? I guess maybe you don't because you're not in the clinic as much as I am, but on someone's last day, they always bring them a cake and they sing Happy Off Therapy Day to you.
I'm sorry, guys. It's not good.
So obviously the music cues you in that this is a significant story. It's a game built by a set of parents who unfortunately lost their young child to cancer, and the jury is out, broadly speaking, on whether or not such empathy games can specifically trigger the empathetic response that they are designed to trigger. So I won't say that Dragon Cancer necessarily solves the problem. If there's a problem here, that solves the problem clearly. But it does create an opportunity to use technology to accomplish this better connection. And there are plenty of examples of these empathy games around if you're kind of interested in seeing how they work, and I think they become an essential part of our toolkit. But again, the user wants the system to empathize with them, and we want to empathize with them in order to make the system work better. The second thing that the user wants is entertainment. And I've chosen this amazing stock photo because who doesn't love a math teacher that can really make you laugh? Huh? The entertainment need not be mindless. Often when we think about entertainment in the context of teaching, we think of it as a separate, apart activity. Remember, again, how old I am. Remember walking into the like your middle school classroom and the VCR was out with the TV on the rack, and you're like, oh, best day ever. Okay. So that's an example of kind of entertainment in its pure form. Sometimes it's just so that the instructor can have a little bit of PD time, right? But entertainment is actually something that when students are asking us to be entertained, When we hear somebody say they want to be entertained, they're not saying mindlessly entertain me at the expense of my learning. That is not what they're asking for, and that is not what we should be hearing from them. They are not asking to be entertained instead of learning. What they are asking is for learning to be entertaining. It's a different request. And we should not dispense with that request. We should not throw that request out because it seems unserious or it seems like it somehow takes away from the seriousness of what we're doing. They're not inherently in conflict with each other if we see them the right way. Engagement. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I do want to point out to you that in a kind of non-educational world, we tend to think of engagement through this prism of a funnel of engagement, okay? Because we're trying to generate money from engagement, we're always trying to take a user in at the top at a low level of engagement and then bring them along to greater and greater amounts of engagement. So we're always trying to get them more and more invested at every step. That's in private kind of industry. And ideally, we're trying to bring them all the way to advocacy. So we're bringing them from a state where they're perhaps a little bit aligned with what we're trying to sell or advocate, and we're getting them all the way to the point where they're standing up and they're saying, yes, bring other people into this mix. Often in education, when we think about designing systems in education, I think we think of this sort of the other way around, like this funnel is turned the other way around. And that is to say, we often want students to exclude themselves if they're not interested in the subject matter. So we want to kind of cut them out of the learning quickly if they're not going to get anywhere. We don't want them taking up space, perhaps. I don't know why we've ended up with this frame of reference. But rather, if we start to think about engagement the way that the user expects it, because the student of today lives in this world 99% of the time, this is how they're accustomed to interacting with systems in their world. Every time they take one step, what we need to do is think about how do we give them a little bit of an incentive to take another step down that path of engagement with us. The more they lean in, the more we want to lean in. We don't want to start by expecting them to make a big lean in before we've chosen to lean in a little bit with them. And one of the best ways that we do that, one of the best ways that we convey that, is by rethinking how we convey progress and mastery to our users in the course of a learning experience. So I've just put up this very simple kind of game progress and mastery screen. This, without knowing which game this is, this looks relatively familiar probably to most of you, right? The concept, the visual concept that's represented here, which is that there's a couple of lines across the screen. Those lines represent your progress to the next level, right? Going across. And you can see that they're indicated here by the phrases like next reward. So as you progress, that bar fills up, that status bar kind of fills up, and you know that when the status bar fills up all the way to the right, ding, 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 you unlock the next thing, you move on, the status bar gets reset, and you keep going, right? We're on this treadmill constantly in games where we're trying to get to the kind of next level. And then what you also see is you also see several numerical representations here, including the user's overall level down below, their current sort of level, and then two different kinds of point systems at the top, one called experience and one called gold. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack here, and I'm not going to spend all of our time unpacking this, but let me just distill this down for you. There is not a single unitary progress to mastery representation here in the form of one score and one moment of graduation. That's the main takeaway. This system has been broken down into many, many, many smaller parts, and progress to the goal has also been represented by several numbers, each one of which has a meaningful relationship to the end user, each one of which is a vector that we want the user to act on because we're trying to encourage them to get as far in the game as possible. And what that does, if you think about it this way, you could have as many different scoring currencies or score point systems as you would like, as is appropriate in your course or in your subject matter, that would get people to the right destination. So let's take the easiest example. Let's say you were teaching, let's say you were teaching a sport, and you're trying to get your learners to improve their performance in this particular sport. Well, you can imagine several performance characteristics that we might want to track, right? These are the stats that we want to track. And they might be things like stamina, shots taken, points earned, passes, right? Collaborative activities. Each one of those is a separate point system. It's a separate point system that we use to help drive people in the right direction in terms of performance. We break those performance elements down into smaller components. We track them, we give them scores, and we give them progress mechanics that show them their overall progress towards the goal. The more we break that down, we can bring that into every domain of education, right? In order to generate better performance and results. So let me show you an example. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of different elements of this at work in industry that might be instructive for education. And let me show you the first example. This is a use of AI that I think is very instructive and I think is really super interesting. So instead of thinking about AI replacing the educator, this is an example where I think AI in instructional tech is very, very valuable, which is in practice. Okay, which is in practice and remediation, practice, perfection, and remediation AI. Let me show you an example of it. It's very rudimentary, but it's currently at work today in, oh my God, PowerPoint.
Start rehearsing. Hello, I'm Chris Menard. Thank you for having me to your event. I'm going to discuss Word and Excel. Some stuff you should know about Word, data analysis, how to do pivot tables, filter and sort, and then I would go into detail about those. So far I believe I'm doing okay. I would discuss Microsoft Word. Here we go, I'm going to read some slides to you. Video provides a powerful way to help you prove your point. When you click online video, you can paste in the embedded code. I'm agreeing with you. Yeah, thank you. Originality. That sounds pretty good. It's also telling me that my speaker's running, as you know. It's telling me how many seconds I've gone into this presentation. And it's also telling me, I'm on slide 5 of 5, and I'm done. Let's see what happens. I feel like my pace was okay, because I usually do between 120 to 150 words a minute. And sure enough, 129 words per minute is my pace. Average pace over time, this is kind of cool right here.
Okay. This tech is not going to teach you how to be a good speaker. This tech, however, does provide an excellent, cheap, and easy to instrument approach for practicing your speech and addressing some of the micro optimizations in speaking that you would need to do in a communications class, right? So imagine this as a foundational use of AI that can help us get our students to practice, right? In a cost-effective way, allowing everybody to practice. And it triggers our kind of empathy requirement that we talked about before, because it would liberate our students to be able to practice whenever they need to practice, whenever they want to practice. Okay? I know, I gave PowerPoint a thing. And so ultimately, if we do all of these things correctly, they also drive a kind of effectiveness. And I want to show you another example now of something with different sort of point systems and instrumentation that's a helper tech that we can use, or that we can imagine using in our educational schema. And I'm going to need you to prepare yourself for this a little bit, because it's a video from Peloton, and so it's going to have a very different energy level from our previous video clip from our very charming PowerPoint user. So hopefully everybody's ready. You'll recognize the instructor if you follow the world of Peloton at all.
Hi friends, I'm Cody Rigsby. Today we are learning about Peloton's lane break. You ready to jump on the bike and check it out? So am I. Let's go. At Peloton, we never settle. Why? Because settling gets you an ugly boyfriend. That's why we're always looking for ways to innovate our rides. This gaming-inspired experience is the perfect complement to your workout routine. Everything that you love about our instructor-led indoor cycling classes is present in this experience. You've got great music, you've got workout variety, you've got on-screen cues to keep you competitive and keep you coming back for more.
Okay, let me show you what some elements of.
Hi friends, I'm Cody Rigsby.
Oh.
Today.
Down to sleep, I pray the Lord that I wake again. I wake again. I wake again. I pray the Lord that I wake
Okay, so what you notice there in Peloton's, so Cody Rigsby's hilarious, by the way, if you don't watch his videos, even if you're not very fit, he's hilarious. Okay, so like me. Okay, so not fit, not hilarious. Sorry, that was confusing. Okay, but so what you see in that second half in lane break, what you saw was this video game is very specifically targeted, this game-like experience, let's call it that, is very specifically targeted to train a Peloton user on the core behavioral items that Peloton wants you to be trained on, right? Do you see those little pieces that it wants you to do? Keep your pace up, but not too high. Burst your pace when they want you to burst your pace. Slow down and keep it going, keep it exactly steady when they want you to keep it steady. Stay out of the gutter, don't exceed the parameters, stay in the box. Because they need you to stay in this performance box, in theory, to get to the correct kind of cardiovascular outcomes of the training routine. So the game effectively is a small training routine that's designed to teach you how to be good at a live Peloton course with the instructor. It reinforces the way to be good at the live course using a game. So much like the examples that I just talked about with AI, it's helper tech teaching students how to learn, teaching students how to behave in a learning environment that's nonetheless led by the instructor. So this is game AI at work helping us accomplish that. And so, I want to talk a little bit, we've talked a bunch about game stuff, but I want to delve into gamification mechanics, and I have a little exercise that I'm hoping you guys will do if you feel like doing something a little bit creative for a few minutes here with me. And that is to think about gamification mechanics. And what are gamification mechanics when I mention them? They are ways in which we can bring little elements to bear to affect and change people's behavior. Okay? So they are techniques, tools and techniques that we can use, that we can introduce into a system. So we can introduce into, let's say, a classroom environment, or let's say an online learning environment, in order to drive changes in people's behavior. And they're called mechanics because typically they wrap up many small interactions into one kind of box. So they have a more flexible and open meaning that gives us a little bit more creative room to play. One of my favorite mechanics is surprise and delight, hence this exercise is the surprising and delightful part of today's Keynote experience. But so let me tell you about the exercise that I want us to do. I'll give you some instructions, and then we'll do it. We'll do it for a few minutes, okay? So this is called the 12 Mechanics Dice Roll Game. It is adapted from Ralph Koster's Theory of Fun. I adapted this from Ralph's book. It's a phenomenal book if you're interested in game design. And I use it a lot whenever we're doing like a game design kind of workshop. And so basically in front of you, some of you have a sheet of paper that has the numbers from 2 to 12 in front of you. Each one of those numbers has a game mechanic beside it, okay? This QR code up here, if you point your camera at it, will take you to a virtual dice roll, a 2-dice roll, okay? And so what I want you to do is working in groups, so you could be in, let's say, groups of 3 or 4 ideally. If you want to work by yourself, that's fine, but I think it's cuter if you do it in a group, a small group, okay? Working in groups of 3 or 4, you're going to roll the dice, and whatever number you land on, you are going to ideate a game mechanic. You're going to ideate a mechanic for your classroom or for your learning experience, whatever, if it's not a classroom learning experience. You're going to ideate an interaction for your users by force based on whatever you land on, okay? So I need you to come up with a creative way of engaging your learners with whatever it is that you land on. So I'll give you an example. I roll the dice, I land on 5, which I think is gifting, if memory serves, okay? I roll the dice, I land on gifting. I'm thinking about how to engage my learners. I've got a presentation skills workshop that I'm giving in a couple weeks. How do I engage my learners in the presentation skills workshop? Using gifting, okay? So my idea is the person who does the best pitch in that workshop is able to give somebody else a bonus 15-minute session with me for feedback, okay? So that's my thinking here. It's like a specific mechanic, forcing myself to think about gifting. We're going to roll the dice. We're going to think about ideas. You should probably, and then, talk about them and figure them out. And why don't we say we're just going to take like 10 minutes? So we should be able to do a couple of them in that time frame. So in groups of 3 or 4, go ahead and do this, and I'll check back in with you all in about 10 minutes, and I want to hear some of your ideas. Okay, everybody. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry to call you back a little bit early. I'm sure we could talk or not talk for hours. We all love soup. Okay, so any of you want to share something that came out of that brief little exercise? Anything especially fun or amusing, or something that you're especially proud of? Yes, ma'am. There's like a little mic right there. Do you mind just popping over to that so everyone can hear you? Yes.
So we got recognition of achievement. We rolled 7, or someone rolled 7. And the first mechanic is badges, right? And trophies. I work for the Office of Micro-Credentials, and that's what we do.
Oh my God, I love that.
And my husband has a business that makes actual patches, like badges.
Okay, physical world badges, space
just
badges.
Just a cool little thing wanted to share with you. That's all.
Okay, awesome. So badging, number 7. That's a classic result. And I would love it, by the way, if the micro-credentials also existed in the physical world. I don't see a reason why people can't turn in some of their points that they've earned or micro-credentials that they've earned and turn those into physical badges for recognition if they want to. So like crossing over between the two? Yeah, like the Boy Scouts. But you like earn the digital ones and then you can make them physical. You guys are all crossover. Okay, awesome. I love that. Physical and digital badge house. I want to go to your house for badging parties. Is that a thing? I don't know. Okay. Anybody else? Any others that you want to share? Oh, yes, sir. Please. The eager students at the front table would like to share.
Yeah. So, since no one else was going to go, so So our table, we came up with the idea of making for next year's EdIT conference a non-fungible token out of our little EdIT logo that's on the stickers that are all over the tables as part of our raffle. We usually do a raffle every year, and I'm going to plug the raffle again right now, to keep people to the end, right? So we have a giveaway today that's from Panther Tech. You'll find out what it is at the end of the day. But that's our idea, a non-fungible token that will be part of our raffle for next year. That'll be the EdIT logo. Thank you.
Okay, that's fantastic. Yes, NFTs all around. Okay, so I think part of the thing with this exercise, and you guys are all, of course, free to take this and use this toolkit, anytime you may want to use this toolkit, to ideate and create new user experiences. Part of it, we've talked a lot about this throughout the conversation. I've mentioned this several times in today's keynote, talking about this idea of co-creating. So one of the things that we are able to do with techniques like these mechanics, like these game mechanics, is actually involve and include our students, our learners, in the process of creating an environment that is meaningful to them. And that, of course, checks the box for empathy right away. Feeling heard, feeling understood, that allows our learners to feel like we're empathetic to them. It allows us to build empathy towards them, and allows us to create systems that are empathetic all around. And if we layer in some of the other things that we've talked about a little bit today, perspective on engagement. So one that breaks down people's behavior, breaks down their progress to mastery, and allows them to see that using helper tech. And I know I've ribbed the Microsoft folks a lot today about PowerPoint, but in fact would be impossible to enjoy this entire experience without Microsoft's involvement and without PowerPoint. So so if we unlock the potential for people to be more engaged, both by giving them systems of progress to mastery and feedback, micro feedback that they might get, but also by using helper technology that is both entertaining and engaging, that allows them to kind of exercise their muscles, to train, to support them on their learning journey, to help them kind of understand how better to learn, and to train them on the things that we need them to do as actual learners and part of our scaffolding. Then, all of the different technologies that we can choose from, the broad palette of technologies that we can choose from, whether that's NFTs, whether that's AI, so things on the blockchain, AI, virtual reality, augmented reality, and of course there's going to be some more VR, AR conversations today. Whatever palette of technologies, whichever items we're choosing from or we're picking and choosing from, those really aren't the significant issues that we need to be addressing as educators, that we need to be thinking about as educators. Because from the time that this presentation began, a short 90 minutes ago, until now, I know it was a short 90, I heard that laugh. It's a short 90, right? Okay. And it's amazing that a guy in his 40s could basically make it through the whole thing without having to go to the bathroom. I just want to point out superhuman feats of accomplishment. Okay, so from the beginning of this presentation until now, significant increases in computing power have been discovered and deployed in the world. I know that's actually hard to wrap your head around. We've probably generated more increases in computing power in the last 90 minutes than we did in the 10 years between 1900 and 1910. In fact, that's accurate. That actually just happened. And so any technology, any specific technology that we choose from, any paintbrush in the palette, any color, any chip, anything that we deploy in our arsenal to educate students is inherently and by definition going to become obsolete in our lifetimes. We will see that transition from something that today is at the height of the Gartner hype cycle, something that we just think is going to transform the world, into something that is quotidian and everyday and basically invisible to us and our learners because it's so ingrained in our world. And it will shift in a very short period of time, in the blink of an eye. I'll be back. I'll probably be in a wheelchair, but I'll be back. And we'll have a laugh And we'll be like, remember when we questioned whether or not the blockchain was important? Well, now it's in everything. And now it isn't important because it's in everything, and it's totally important because it's in everything. And that's the funny paradox about all of this. The funny paradox about the future of technology. The funny thing that the pandemic did, bringing it full circle, the funny thing that the pandemic did was, in addition to, it was first and foremost to accelerate our understanding of the need for resilience in transitioning to new technologies. It pointed out to us that external factors, separate from the continuous aggressive climb of Moore's law, that there are also additional external factors which will prompt significant changes and needs to move forward in our adoption of technology and education. Moore's law is one thing, that is inexorably happening, and then there's all this other stuff that can come at any moment and blow everything up and force us to move forward. But the great news, and for those of us that made it through the pandemic, and I don't want to dismiss all the loss that we've experienced, for those of us who made it to this side, the incredible resilience that you displayed, that the institution displayed, that our learners displayed, just being able to get through that is an exciting, enervating, and energizing vision of a future in which everything is possible with learning technology. And if I can leave you with one thought today, embrace that resilience. Embrace your resilience. See yourself as that open, non-cynical, resilient, creative receiver of the gifts of the advance of technology. And there's literally nothing you, the institution, or your learners cannot accomplish. Thank you.